Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. This week we got to talk to Dr. Keith Keating, who's the Chief Learning and Development Officer at BDO Canada, and he just wrote a book called Hidden Value. We had the chance to sit down and talk to him about his thoughts on this book as well as L&D in general. Stacia, what did you take away from the discussion?
There are a few things. One is he created in this book, which is a result of his PhD research, this value creation compass. And it has, as you would expect, 4 elements: empowering people, driving business growth, building organizational resilience, and delivering customer value. And we don't usually hear learning folks talk about creating value in those sorts of ways. More often, it's like really just about empowering people. And so I really like the balance that this compass brings to thinking through the value that L&D brings. So that was one thing. The second was he talked a lot about context and understanding the context of the people that L&D is enabling, whether that is the CFO, he talks a lot about that, but also just others in the business. So what is their context? And given that context, how can L&D create the best value for those folks? And then the final thing right there at the end of the podcast, we talked about the cost of failure. What happens if L&D is not able to make its value visible, particularly now when we see Gen AI removing some of the maybe traditionally seen value of L&D? And I thought his answer on that was brilliant. I'm not going to take it from you all. I'm going to let you get there. But that was really thoughtful and poignant for me. What about for you, Danny?
Just the concept of the book was really interesting. So he talked to several CFOs, and because he saw a disconnect between L&D and CFOs. In fact, he told a story about how the L&D department was afraid to provide any extra information to the CFO because he was afraid that the team was afraid that their budget would get cut and they would have to do the same with less. So it was really interesting that he went to the CFOs and said, all right, what is this disconnect about? And what do you actually need from us to show that value and make sure that we're working as a team? He had a couple of interesting points from that conversation. The first one is that he mentioned that the CFOs were sure looking for the data, which we've been focusing on for quite a bit in the last few years. But he also mentioned the importance of story. So not just data, this is the data that proves that we have worth, but the story surrounding that, the story about the impact that they're actually making on the organization was as important as the data, which is, I think, the first time I've ever heard that. It was really beautiful.
When I read that in the book, I got the biggest smile because that's what this podcast is about, right? Like workplace stories to bring our data and insights to light. I was like, yes, he's got it.
I think the other thing, I'm actually going to quote him directly because this is something that we talked about throughout, but he summed it up really well. He said, future doesn't belong to job titles. It belongs to people who create value. So he mentioned specifically, maybe L&D doesn't exist the way that it does in the future, but there are always going to be problems to solve. And the future is going to belong to the people who create value, not the people that have certain job titles. Anyway, I thought it was a fascinating conversation. He is pretty forward thinking when it comes to the way he's thinking about the future of L&D. We highly encourage you to listen to this one. If you like this one, please follow Workplace Stories on the podcast platform of your choice. And please follow our research on LinkedIn as well as redthreadresearch.com. Keith, welcome to Workplace Stories. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here.
To get started, Keith, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and maybe even a little bit about your company.
Sure. I'm a lifelong learning development practitioner. So what I do is help people. I help the business ultimately solve problems. It can look like building a formal learning program, but a lot of time it's things like, are we developing the right leaders? Do we have the right skills to navigate change? Are we enabling performance? All the things related to learning and development. At the end of the day, my job is just helping people be more capable, confident, and future ready. BDO is a professional services firm. So if you've heard of Deloitte, Accenture, KPMG, we're next.
Okay. And today we're going to talk about your book. You wrote a book called Hidden Value. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But when it comes to value, why should people listen to you?
I'm going to pivot that question a little bit and just expand it in general. Why should people listen to me
All right, fair enough.
about L&D? And the answer is because I care. Those 2 words. So I care deeply about this profession. I care about the people doing the work. I care about the teams who are overlooked, undervalued, underestimated, just largely us. I care because I've been one of them for 25 years. I know what it feels like to do the hard work and still not be seen. And I know what it feels like to wonder, does anybody really care? Does anybody see the value that we're bringing? So the 3 words are because I care. I care about the learners. I care about us as a profession. I care about our industry.
I like it.
So Keith, tell us a little bit about why you wrote Hidden Value and why now?
I believe that we're standing at a crossroads, and not just as L&D practitioners, but as a global workforce. What I mean specifically is that we have been in what we've called for a long time the knowledge economy, but I think we're moving into something very different, and that is a value economy. So in a knowledge economy, we're measured by what we know. But let's be honest, the devices that we can hold in our hands has more knowledge than I'll ever be able to grasp. So with all of these technology tools available to us, the question is, how do you use AI, collaboration, creativity, innovation, and learning to create value? And so for me, I think the direction that we're headed in is value creation is our new currency. And it's not just for L&D, it's for every business unit. Look, if you watch Wall Street, you watch any public company or any business in general, it's all about the money, the value that that company is creating. What we do in talent development, learning development, we have tremendous value. We shape capability, we drive adaptability, we unlock human potential. But that value is often too hidden and misunderstood or even under leveraged. And so I wanted to give our profession the language and the tools and the framework to help uncover the value that we're creating and to really prepare us for what comes next. And what I mean by that is the shift from knowledge economy to value economy, because this is something that we can lead. We had such a role to play when COVID happened. We have such an opportunity to play right now with Gen AI, with just being at the beginning of it, and everybody at the same starting line that we can support our organizations. And so I think the next transition is moving to that value economy. Everybody in the organization should be thinking about, how do I create value for the organization, for my business unit, for my leaders? So we can drive that. And if you imagine a future where we aren't thought of as just training, but we're thought of as value seekers, as value creators, that's why I wrote the book.
So I think this is really interesting. We have some data. It's probably about 9 or 10 months old now, but we have some data. It's longitudinal over a couple of years, and it appears that L&D is being invited less to workforce discussions and less to strategic discussions. Some of that obviously is due to changing things in the organization and different priorities and things like that. But I think this idea of value is really interesting, because I don't know any L&D person who says, I'm not bringing value to my organization. I'm really interested to get into how you define value and how we see that sort of playing out in the organization. Before we get to that, I'm really interested in your personal story and kind of what led you here. You are clearly very passionate about this and very passionate about learning. So give us a little bit of background of you as a person.
So I think to know who I am today is a doctor of education from an Ivy League university. I have lots of degrees, but to know who I truly am at the core is that I'm a high school dropout. And for years, high school dropout wasn't just part of my story. It was my story. It was the beginning and it was the end of how I saw myself, how my family saw me, how others saw me. And I was so ashamed of it that I hid it. I lied about it for years. I let it define me to the point where I convinced myself that that wasn't even true. And I didn't even remember it until about 9 years ago. And today, it's still the beginning of my story, but it's not the end. And so my view on what we do on learning is deeply personal, because for a long time, I didn't believe that I was capable of learning. I struggled in school so significantly. I was told that I had a learning disability, that I wasn't smart enough, that I wasn't cut out for traditional education. And I believed it for a long time. And so I had to make a choice to protect myself to eventually drop out. So I didn't even finish ninth grade. It wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years later that I realized that the problem wasn't me. It was how I was being taught. And so the moment that I learned how to learn, everything changed. And it was like somebody handed me the keys to my own future. And learning stopped being something that made me feel broken and something that made me feel powerful. And that journey has shaped everything that I believe about what we do, about learning and development. Because when you've been the one who's counted out, who's overlooked, who's underestimated, it changes how you see other people. And it makes you hyper aware of those invisible barriers that others might be facing. So it makes you ask questions like, who are we missing in the workforce? Who's not being developed? Who's not being considered in this specific learning experience? So for me, I'm constantly rooting for the underdog because I am one. And it was shameful for so long, but now I love it. I love saying that. And I know firsthand what learning can unlock when you're truly given the chance. So in short, L&D changed the trajectory of my life, gave me confidence, it gave me options. It gave me a future that I could never, ever have imagined. That's why I believe so deeply in our work, because what we do changes lives. And I know we're not recording video, but I'm holding up a Post-it note. And I actually keep this next to my desk, and I've had it for years, not the same Post-it note, obviously, but these 3 words: learning changes lives. And anytime the going gets tough for me and I get frustrated, I'm treated like an order taker, which happens all the time. It's just part of our business. I look over and I just remind myself of our bigger why, our bigger purpose, and that's changing lives.
Can I ask a question that we didn't script? I'm super interested in that changing point for you, that turning point. What was it that triggered it, if there was a moment?
There was, and it was this industry. So I was working at fast food at Wendy's, and I just knew that I wanted to be something more. And that label was given to me because that's what my teachers and family said. If you drop out, you're going to be destined to a life of fast food. First of all, as if there's something wrong with that. Because, by the way, the minute we don't have fast food workers, everybody's all up in arms about where are all the people. So there can be careers absolutely in fast food. Anyway, I was doing that, and I knew I wanted to do something else. And I'm old enough that there was an ad in the newspaper, because you might remember once upon a time we had to go to the newspaper on Sunday because that's where all the good jobs were. And it was for CompUSA, which was like the original Best Buy. It was for a Microsoft Office trainer. And I remember thinking, I've used Office. Like, I've never had a good teacher. How hard could it be to be a trainer? So I showed up to the interview and I was horrible. I was terrified. I didn't know what I was doing. And so I got so nervous that I just kept coughing through the whole thing to buy me time to answer the questions about how to do a test teach. And finally, she interrupts me and says, "It sounds like you're really sick. Thank you for coming in." I'm like, yes, I really want the job. Didn't think I would get it. A week later, they called and offered me the job. And I was 17. My job was to travel around the country teaching Social Security Administration offices how to use Microsoft Office 2000. So I walk into the classroom and I see a sea of my parents and they see their child. And it was the first class. I broke down in tears, ran out, but I used that. And it was like that night I went back and I just practiced and practiced. So long story short, too late, I had to teach all of these classes, but in order to do it, I had to teach myself first. And so it became me learning the content, even as simple as it might seem for Microsoft Office or Word or Excel or PowerPoint. I had to take each one of these and I had to break it down, figure out how do I learn this so I can then translate it to someone else. And I remember the first time about 6 months into it, when I saw the light come on in someone's eyes when they got, I think it was Excel we were talking about, or a formula, and she just got it and she lit up. And it was the first time that I truly felt like I had value. Like there was something that I could contribute. I get choked up even thinking about it. And that just set me on this path. I wouldn't say that it was all so clear then. It became clear over time. It was a job, then it became a career, then it became a passion. And I would say now it's a calling.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
I want to talk a little bit more about value. And because in the book, one of the early things you mentioned was the 3 dimensions of value. And those were economic value, personal value, and societal value. Can you help folks understand what those are and why you think they're distinct and important?
Economic value is probably the one that leaders expect the most. And it's how we create our measurable business outcomes. Those are probably the ones that we're already thinking about. Could be improved productivity, reducing errors, retention, time to proficiency, all the things. But one of the things that I learned in my doctoral research from CFOs is that it's not always about this economic value, and in particular, ROI. And bless Philip's ROI model. It's excellent. It's there for a reason, but it becomes one that we use too often. And we think that is the solution. But so much of what we do cannot be calculated in that manner. And so it's not about always showing ROI formulas. It's about how do we contribute to strategic priorities. So anyway, that's the first one, economic value. It's connecting our work to the financial goals of the business. The second one is personal value. And this one I think gets overlooked and is one of the biggest opportunities for us because in traditional measurement, we focus on economic, but what we're doing is we're helping people. We're transforming people's lives. We're helping them do their job better, differently, get promoted, stay with the company because they thought they were going to leave, or even help people leave the company because they have new skills. We're boosting confidence. We don't measure that. And that's where the learning becomes life-changing. And as I should share with you from my own story, it didn't just change what I could do. It changed what I believed I could be capable of becoming. Where do we measure that? We don't. And so that's one piece that we need to start looking at is that personal value. And then the third one is societal value. This is a bit broader because we often think of what we do just in the construct of our organization within those walls. But the truth is that when we invest in learning, we're not just improving job performance of that one person. We can be contributing to stronger communities, more resilient industries, equitable society, if we're passionate and loud enough about the importance of learning and how we're sharing the skills. So think about companies that create leadership programs and they put them out into the world. They put them out into society, into the community, or skills initiatives that upskill underserved populations. Learning isn't just about business success. It's about a force for societal progress. And what I mean by that is one of the things that I'm passionate about doing at BDO is the programs that we create, we want to replicate those and offer those in a public setting to maybe those that are underserved. So it could be new women in leadership. It could be local Indigenous individuals in Canada that don't have access to education. So the mistake that we often make is we focus on just one dimension, and that's usually economic. But if we step back and we really double click, we'll find that there are other dimensions like personal or like societal.
In your book, you told a story about financial leaders who were maybe perceiving what learning was doing. I don't want to say wrong, but they had a different perspective from the learning team of value. And you talked about 4 disconnects. I'm wondering if you could tell that story a little bit and outline those 4 disconnects.
Sure. So the insights come from my doctoral research, the University of Pennsylvania, and that heavily influenced hidden value. Side note, if you've done a doctorate, consider publishing your work in a book. Don't let it just sit on the shelf as your research. So anyway, my research was about understanding CFO's perspective on organizational learning. And the reason that I did that is I was at, I won't name the name, Fortune 500 company, and we had just had a $3 million cost savings that we thought we calculated and about a $2 million ROI in quotes from a program. And I kept saying to my leader, let's go out and share this. And he said, do not, because if you share it outside of these walls, finance is going to cut our budget and they're going to expect us to replicate this on a recurring basis. And at the same time, I was joining Penn and I had this fear of CFOs. And then I thought, is that fear founded? Because I've never even talked to them. So specifically what I set out to understand was what beliefs do CFOs hold about learning and what actually influences the learning budget. We could do an entire episode on those results alone, but in summary, I can't really summarize it. The research is out there. It's free. Feel free to Google it. So let me just get to your question. The disconnect. So there were 4 friction points between L&D and finance leaders. So the first is the perception gap. What I mean by that is CFOs inherently believe in the idea of learning. no one was willing to say, no, learning's bad, we shouldn't do it. But they was like, yeah, learning's really important. It's great. And they value, again, in quotes, that people are the organization's greatest asset. But belief isn't enough. And what I mean by that is there was a separation between action, like concrete, and abstract. These are very abstract ideas. Yeah, learning's important. Yeah, people are our greatest asset. And then you drill down and you say, how are you managing that from a concrete basis? Can you give me any numbers? Can you tell me how much you've invested in your greatest asset? Oh, no. And then I would say, well, can you tell me how much you invested in your IT? Oh, yes, we invested X billions of dollars. But I thought people were the greatest asset. So there's a perception issue between what they believe and then how they're actually showing up in the organization. Second is the measurement challenge, which we already know is there. Now, what was interesting is they're frustrated by our reliance on our activity metrics. So our completions, our smile sheets, our Phillips ROI model, which, by the way, they will never use. We can send them that little calculation that we use, and you'll notice it's never on a financial statement because it's not real for them. And so in order for us to figure out what is real for them, we have to have those conversations. What they said were things like, don't just send me your complex Excel spreadsheet formulas. Show me how this moves a strategic needle. So basically what they're asking for is clarity, not our version of calculus. So the third one is our story data balance. And this one really surprised me because, at least through my research, what CFOs were saying is, we don't just want your numbers. Specifically what they said, I remember this quote, numbers tell part of the story, but show me the real transformation that's happening. And so they want to actually understand the human impact behind the numbers, which I thought was really interesting because you think of CFOs and you're like, it's a nerd with glasses who's just dealing with numbers, but they have a heart. And they want to know about the story as well. So they want the data paired with the story. And then the fourth void is our partnership void. What I mean by that is CFOs don't want L&D operating in isolation, but they're not going to come to us. They're not going to build a relationship with us. They expect us to come forward to them as a strategic partner. They want us to understand what's valuable to them or meaningful, to connect learning to strategy, to speak in their terms, not our own terms. So when I asked them, what do you really want from L&D? It was a kind of a consistent answer. We want help to see how what you're doing aligns with our strategy. Show me how you're solving the real problems, whether it's retention, risk, keeping people here. What are the stories behind that number? And that's how you get my attention. And one other quote that I loved is one CFO said, I have so many fires at my feet. I can't care about what you care about. You have to make me care. And that one has stuck with me. And not just for CFOs, but just in everyone that I think we get so offended that not everybody cares about L&D as much as we do, but why should they? This isn't their focus. They're not getting paid to care, and we are getting paid to care for the most part. We got to help them understand why.
I know we have some more questions about measurement, so I don't want to go super duper deep on it right now, but you mentioned, kind of challenge disconnect number 2 being the measurement challenge, and they don't want to see the ROI calculations. But a lot of them do want to see some of the things that you mentioned, potentially impact on engagement, attrition, turnover, et cetera. So was there anything that came out of these interviews in terms of how to give them metrics that make them care, or how to position, not just the storytelling, but the actual numbers that would make them stand up and take notice?
Yes. And it starts with asking them first.
Okay.
What? Asking them what they want?
What? Getting their opinion?
And not just sending it to them. And I think that answer applies to so much of what we do because we have this idea of what we think others want. And then we spend our time creating it, getting these equations, putting these PowerPoint decks together. I'm speaking from personal experience, setting up the meeting, get in the meeting, you show the first slide and they're like, what is this? Why are you showing me this? Oh, well, I want to tell you about this and this. It's not meaningful to me. So it's starting first. We got to get their buy-in, figure out what is it that you want to see? What do you care about? How do you want to see it? And then providing it to them.
One of the things I really liked in the book was you talked a lot about context, understanding the context of the person who you're speaking with or trying to show the value to. And so I think that's a really nice illustration of get in their context first, understand what they care about, and then go from there.
Context is everything.
Yeah, I just listened to an Adam Grant and Trevor Noah podcast, and Trevor is talking almost entirely about context. By the time I was done with that podcast, I'm like, we could eliminate like 90% of the world's challenges if we could just step into somebody else's context for a minute and understand where they're coming from. It's nuts.
Empathy.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about your book. In your book, you have a model. Let's keep on going on your book. You have a model called the Value Creation Compass. And it has 4 quadrants. Tell us a little about each of those quadrants and how L&D teams can use it to surface and communicate the value that they're already creating.
So the compass is designed to help us have a language of business impact. So the compass is about business impact, if I were to describe it in a few words. And there's 4 directions, just like a compass, north, south, east, and west. So the first and most important ones are true north, and that's empowering people. That's the foundation of what we do when we develop people through strategic skill building, leadership development, personal growth, all the things. Everything else becomes possible. And so this quadrant focuses on unlocking human potential, and that turns into organizational capability. We're probably doing a lot of what's in there, but you can't have a discussion on business growth, development, value without our people. So then we go to the east, driving business growth. This is where we contribute to innovation or revenue growth, market expansion, strategic expansion. These are 4 categories that when you take a step back and you look at the operations of the business, this is how we're quantifying, is there business growth? We play a role in there. Developing capabilities that open new markets, that can lead to new product creation, that accelerate any strategic initiatives. And think about all the work that we're hopefully doing around Gen AI in the organization. It may lead to one of those. So are we measuring that and equating that back to business growth? Then we move south to building organizational resilience. So this quadrant is really about the backbone that allows the organization to navigate change. Change is happening faster than ever at an exponential rate, blah, 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 all the memes. But we are one of those massive supporting mechanisms to help our organization navigate that change, to manage risks, to hopefully remain sustainable over time. And so here's where we contribute to operational excellence. So there's 4 categories that I mentioned there: operational excellence, cultural strength, adaptability, and employee well-being. Our programs tend to, and hopefully lead to, reduce risk, process improvements, helping a workforce be agile. So are we measuring it to that level, that depth? And then west, something that we don't think about necessarily unless we're specifically focusing on customer experience, but is delivering customer value. So this direction reminds us that learning just doesn't impact our internal employees. It can shape the customer experience. And if you're a business, you have customers. When people are better trained, more engaged, more capable, your customers notice. And so learning shows up as improved service level quality, customer satisfaction, loyalty, brand strength. One of the messages I often share with my team is, how are we helping to improve our organizational brand, our firm brand outside of what we do? So the real magic of the compass is it helps L&D step back from just thinking about our myopic view of how we're measuring our value and looking at these 4 dimensions of what can be quantified as organizational success. So if you think about, let's say, a leadership development program, yes, you're empowering people, but that same program might also strengthen organizational resilience because you're fostering better collaboration between teams. It might help drive business growth because you're able to execute on your organizational strategy. And then it might enhance customer value because you're improving service outcomes. So we're shifting the conversation from what learning did we do to what impact did we have across the business?
So can I ask a follow-up question here? Because I'm going back to the conversations you had with the CFOs, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Many of the things that you just mentioned are not tangible. And that is a problem that L&D repeatedly runs into, is people in the organization want tangible value, proof that they're doing something good. But many of the things you just mentioned are not tangible. I think it comes in with that storytelling you talked about, but could you maybe dive a little bit deeper into that? If these are the four quadrants of having value in an organization, how should L&D approach shouting it from the rooftops, for example?
In the book, I do break it down by tangible and intangible. So each four of these quadrants will have both of those because I didn't want to just leave it as all these intangible ideas. So both of them are in there. Great call out. I think the ones that I was just largely sharing the intangible pieces, but there's tangible in there as well. And so it's the balance. It's the balance of both. If I were presenting a story, I'm looking for that tangible data. Maybe it's one data point, but then I'm drilling down into the intangibles that support it. It's like you could show we've reduced risk or we've improved our retention by 20%. So you could stop there at that, or you could then explain, here's some of the outcomes from the people who've stayed. They feel more confident in their job. 12 of them were promoted to new roles. 5 of them transferred over and got a new position in a different business unit where they're thriving a little bit more. So it's not stopping at that tangible, but it's giving the context that supports it to turn it into a real story.
So I want to ask you, sorry, Stacia, I keep on jumping in here, but I want to ask you one more question with respect. So I have said publicly in the past, I don't know how I feel about the fact that I've said this publicly, but I've never seen a group of people with a lower self-esteem than L&D functions. And the things that you're talking about actually take some guts to say. And so what advice would you give to learning leaders particularly, but also to their teams to be able to confidently share this information?
I would first practice it with my team internally, telling the story, sharing the story. And by the way, I'm not new to the industry. So it's not like I woke up and just had all this knowledge. This is over 25 years of trying, failing, and FAIL. I love the acronym. FAIL stands for first attempt in learning. So a lot of what I'm sharing is based on my own failures and learning from those. So one, it's practicing role playing with your team to tell those stories and have them call you out, have them try to poke holes in it. The other is using Gen AI at this point to help you create a more succinct story with your data. I mean, amount of evolution that L&D should be able to have as a result of AI could be astronomical. Because if you use it properly, and we all should be using it, it helps us be more efficient, more effective. It helps us create these connections that we wouldn't have even known existed. Little side note, someone took my doctoral research and put it through Notebook LM and then something else, and they sent me the podcast of it, and I was in tears to hear this come to life. But also, it found more points in my research than I missed. And I was listening to it the first time and I'm like, what are they talking about? That wasn't my research. And then I went back and looked again and used Gen AI. I was like, oh my gosh, I completely missed these points. So moral of the story is I get that a lot of people have low self-esteem because we've been held down for so long. But a lot of the reason that we're held down is because we haven't done the work to build up the credibility and the skill set to have those strategic business partner, trusted advisor, consultative skills to be able to have those conversations. A lot of times we don't treat our industry with the respect that it deserves. And that's on us. And we are always, in my opinion, going to, by default, be treated as order takers. And so a lot of times we get burnt out with that. And we think, oh, why am I being treated this way? And I equate it to doctors, nurses, dentists. They don't get to wake up in the morning and say, I hope I go to the hospital today and there's no problems for me to solve. There's no one that talks back and tells me what their diagnosis really should be. No, their job is to deal with problems and solve those problems. And that's what our job is as well. We're going to deal with problems every single day. And that's going to include people treating us like order takers because they don't know any different. They're only treating us based on their experience with learning and development. And in my research, what I've also done is asked about people's experience. And you can tell when you ask somebody to name the best learning experience they've ever had, and they can't do it, that lets you know about their experience from an organizational learning perspective compared to somebody who can say, yes, oh my gosh, I went through this life-changing leadership development or coaching program or Gen AI program. So we're treated by order takers like default. We got to just get over that, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So I hope I answered your question. I'm rambling.
One thing I want to add before we move on to lightning round, though, is you mentioned practicing with your team, but I think there's also an element of practicing, maybe not with the CFO, but with other people who are financially astute. Maybe it's lower in the organization or something, because getting that quick feedback loop from those folks and also them seeing that you are asking the questions and seeking to understand their perspective and pressure testing your own ideas builds a lot of that credibility and also enables them to later say to the CFO, maybe when we stumble, because we all do at some point, hey, I know Stacia didn't maybe say that quite right, but she's asking all the right questions. Maybe we should give her the benefit of the doubt or something like that. So there's a social connection, social element to all of this that I think we get so fearful because we want to always be right when we have the big conversations.
It's all about relationships. I think that's exactly what you're alluding to here, is that, not alluding, that sounds like a harsh word, but that's basically what you're saying is build relationships. Don't just go right to the CFO. 100%. You're not going to finish this podcast and connect with them for the first time, but do start with their team members. And I would expand on that and say, it's not just the CFO that we need to be building relationships with. It's all of the C-suite, but of course, not starting with them. We have to work our way up to them. Great point.
Well, let's go into lightning round. Keith, lightning round is just to help our audience get to know you just a little bit better. So we have 3 questions. First question, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Superman.
Okay.
So I would wear the pajamas. I would wear the cape. I attempted to jump out of a second-story window.
Oh my gosh.
And that was when my parents had to sit me down. I luckily didn't break anything, and tell me, you will never be Superman. It was an earth-shattering moment. I think I was 7 or 8. And talk about a dream killer. And then anytime somebody asks me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I just was like, no. Not
Nothing. The dream is dead.
It's dead. Can't be Superman.
That's awesome.
Kind of building on that. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?
Be Superman. No.
I had a feeling that's where that was going.
I would love to be a singer. And I have the passion for it and everything here in the chest and the heart. And I have a fine speaking voice, but just something changes when it tries to turn into a singing voice. And I thought that you could buy a voice. And I lived in New York City for a long time. And I spent every penny I had on the world's best vocal coaches, including, fun fact, Sandra Bullock's father was a famous vocal coach. And so I had hired him and an opera coach. And eventually this nice lady on the Upper East Side said, listen, you have tenacity. And my first question was, what's tenacity? I didn't finish 9th grade. And she said, it means that you should stop wasting your money.
Well, I hope you still sing in the shower, at least.
It's a very expensive shower concert. Yes.
Okay, final question. If you didn't have to sleep, what would you do with the extra time?
This sounds cliche, but I would work. I love what I do. I'm one of those people that I live to work. Some people, they work to live, but I work easily 14, 15 hours a day by choice, absolutely by choice. There's BDO, there's supporting our industry. We just have such a wonderful group in the L&D talent development training industry of people who want to be better. And that inspires me to want to keep working to try and help at least share what I've learned. Michio Kaku once said, knowledge is useless if you don't share it. And so for me, I just want to share the knowledge that I have to help our industry. So long story short, it would be, I would work more and then I would go to the gym more.
Okay.
Cool. Well, let's get back to some of the topics we have here. In the book, you talk about using 4 essential lenses of context to align L&D with business needs. Can you share with us what those lenses are and how they help?
So we talked about context a little bit. So let's expand on that, because we tend to focus on our learning needs or our learning language or our learning strategies, or we make it about us. We don't make it enough about the business. And so I introduced 4 essential lenses of context. The first one is organizational context. So what's happening inside the organization as a whole? What are the strategic goals? What are the cultural priorities? What are the operational challenges, leadership expectation? This lens helps us keep grounded in the business reality that we serve. And so again, it's about taking a step back from my L&D priorities to what are the organizational priorities and how are we supporting those? Is what's happening in our industry? Are we facing digital disruptions? Do we have regulatory shifts? Is there labor shortages, customer behavior changes? This ensures that we're preparing talent and our own mindset, not just for today's business, but how the industry is evolving. If you're not sure about industry context or industry shifts, again, Gen AI is a great tool to be supporting from this perspective. So after industry, then we go broader. So, we're starting small with organization, we're moving to industry, then we move out broader to market. So what external forces are shaping our customers, our competitors, the economic environment? So right now we have tariffs, we have geopolitical shifts, we have Gen AI, technological innovations that are disrupting every industry, every organization across the globe. How are we thinking about this lens and how it might apply to us, but also to our business partners, our stakeholders, so we can be thinking future focused for them as well, not just us. And then the fourth context would be the cultural context. What's happening in society as a whole? And I don't want to get political, but you can't not say like we've had DE&I shift in priority. We have geopolitical approaches. We've got generational shifts in the workforce now. We've got people working longer. We've got 4 generations in the workforce. We've got remote work. Is it good? Is it bad? Can I do it? Can I not do it? Our overall mental health and our well-being. So there's a cultural component as well. When we think about these 4 different contexts or these 4 different lenses, we stop building our solutions in isolation and we start designing solutions that can support the business and the people and the actual need that we may not even know exist or somebody may not be articulating, but it allows us to be hopefully one step ahead of what could be coming. So we move from being reactive to being proactive.
I want to maybe shift gears a little bit and talk about, maybe it's not shift gears, but sort of the future. What happens if we fail? What happens if L&D fails to become visible, their value?
When we stay hidden, the costs are, I think, bigger than most in our industry really will acknowledge. And so it starts with our credibility. If the business doesn't see clearly how we drive impact, we get sidelined. Budgets shrink. We're left out of these strategic conversations, and then learning becomes this nice to have rather than a strategic imperative. So number 1 is credibility. Number 2 is opportunity. When leaders don't understand what we're capable of, they don't bring us the real problems. And a great example of this is when we see our stakeholders going to outside vendors, outside providers, outside consultants. It's like, you have your own team right here. You could have saved $500,000 by leveraging us, but we lose that opportunity. They miss that learning can be that lever that helps them. But that's on us. And then the third, I would say, is the talent suffers. When talent development isn't prioritized, people leave. We saw that during the pandemic and even a little bit after the pandemic. It seems to have quieted down. But I remember a bunch of stats from McKinsey that the number one reason why people were leaving was because they didn't have learning and development opportunities. They didn't have growth opportunities. So if we don't have L&D, then skill gaps grow, organization struggles to adapt, people feel stuck, unsupported, there's turnover. But I would say number 4, and the most biggest outcome for us staying hidden, it costs us our own future. What I mean by that is when we stay hidden, we become the easiest target for cuts. And this is basic, it has nothing to do with L&D. But if you just take a step back and think about the way the business functions, if a business function's contribution is not clear, it's seen as overhead. It gets deprioritized. Worse, it gets eliminated in favor of the functions whose value are obvious. The end game for us is if we stay hidden, if our value is hidden, we can face extinction. And that's not to be dramatic, but we see that happen a lot where we're seeing L&D defunded. And the tragedy is it's not because we don't create value. It's because we're not making that value seen. We're not making it heard. We're not making it understood in a language that the business care about.
I think that's a really interesting point. I've been thinking a lot about this because we have seen those budget cuts and we have seen L&D sort of shrink in number of people in teams and all kinds of things across everything right now. And I did a thought experiment one day. What if L&D does go away? What happens? And it's bad for L&D for sure. But L&D is the part of the organization that ensures a skilled workforce. Like that's their job, is to ensure a skilled workforce. And so if nobody's doing that, if no one's actively looking after that, what happens? Who's going to pick that up? I don't have an answer.
Yeah, there's a quote from Dr. Reginald, totally drawing blank, Revan. He is the one who coined action learning. And he said that in order for an organization to survive, the rate of learning internal must match the rate of change external. And so if you think about change is happening exponentially, it's happening faster than ever. We should be one of the most important business units helping our organization through that change. We can get there. We just have to be able to tell the story and help our value seen. I want to just give a little asterisk. We could still do all these things and still not be seen as successful by some executives. So in no way is this the holy grail and a guaranteed we're not going to fail methodology, but it is at least a step in the right direction for us to be able to say, we've done all the things. If we've done all of this and you still want to defund us, okay, that's on you.
What you're saying made me reflect on that question of what else might we be missing. And I wonder also if we miss the humanity in organizations, if we get this wrong, or if we fail at this. I'm going back to where we started, which was around the values, right? The economic value, the personal value, and the societal value. I feel like a lot of what you two were mentioning in terms of what we miss is firmly in that economic value, retention of people, higher cost to acquire talent, et cetera. But what makes our organizations human and what makes learning so special, I think, is that personal value, that societal value. And if we're not doing this in organizations, or we're not doing this while our organizations are places where we learn and grow, I think we suffer broadly. Personally, we suffer societally.
I think some of it can get lost between the delineation between HR and L&D. If I asked you, where do you think that conversation might sit about retention or career path? A lot of people would say that's in HR. But I disagree. I don't think that one person or one group should own that. And I think that we have to lay a claim to having that conversation. It doesn't have to be the only one having that conversation. I'm not trying to take it away from HR, but I absolutely want to know who's struggling in the business so that I can help be a concierge for your development plan. I love when people tell me at BDO, I've been here 11 years and no one has invested in me at all. Perfect. I'm looking for all of you because we know who the people are that get picked to go to these high profile programs. It's the same 10, 20, 30 people. And then we've got thousands and thousands of other people. Maybe they're introverts. Maybe they're not raising their hand to say that they want to do this because they're hoping that somebody sees them. And so when we can see those individuals and capture their story and help tell their story, that's where the humanity comes in. And that's where our value starts to rise because we're focusing on the people, not just the numbers.
I think that's a nice lead into a question that I want to end this section with, which is, what do you think is in store for the future of L&D?
There are two big shifts that I'm seeing. I'm not someone who would use the word predict. I'm not predicting anything, but I would say there are shifts that I think are happening. And by the way, I'm not going to say Gen AI either, because that's cheating. That genie is out of the bottle. Predicting AI isn't bold. That's here and it's happening. So I would say the first shift is that we're moving into a value economy, which I talked about at the very beginning of the segment, and our worth defined by what we know. It's going to be defined by what we can do with it. And learning can no longer be about consumption. Every initiative has to be directly tied to value creation. And whether that's empowering people, building resilience, driving growth, customer value. Yes, and there's a certain book that does go into this into deep details. Wink, wink. The second shift, I think, is more existential, and it kind of links back to what you were just talking about. What happens if L&D is not here? I don't think that L&D survives, at least not the name L&D. And it's not because what we do is irrelevant. It's because of how we define ourselves has to evolve. Gen AI has already upended content creation, delivery, instructional design, coaching, but I'm not worried at all for me and my job, because the future doesn't belong to job titles. It belongs to people who create value. And so if you were to stop me on the street and say, what do you do? I don't define myself as L&D anymore. I am a problem solver. I'm a connector. I'm a capability builder. And sometimes the answer is learning. Sometimes it's a workflow design. Sometimes it's just being an ear to my stakeholder and just listening to them tell me all of their frustrations, even though I can't do a thing about it, but I can just be there for them. I would say half of what I do has nothing to do with learning and development or training. And that's exactly why I stay relevant. Because the three most dangerous words in any organization, not my job. You will never hear that from me. What you will hear is, how can I help? And that mindset, that willingness to stretch beyond the boundaries of a role or a function, that's what's going to keep us future ready, no matter how the landscape shifts. But when we have this mindset of, I'm just training, I'm just learning and development, I'm just an instructional designer, you're putting yourself in a box, but one day the lid on that box is going to close. And so for me, I don't want a box. I don't want walls. I'm here to solve problems. L&D may evolve beyond recognition, but as long as organizations have problems to solve and have people that have potential that needs to be unlocked, our role, whatever it's called, will always matter.
2 final questions for you, Keith. The first one is, can you please tell us the name of your book again and where we can get it?
Which one? Thank you for asking. So the first one is called The Trusted Learning Advisor, and the second one is called Hidden Value. And both are available at any online online bookstore of your choice. I don't want to promote any specific book.
Perfect. The final question that we always ask is called what we call the purpose question. And that question is, why do you do the work that you do?
I would link back to the very first question at the beginning, which is, why listen to me? Because I care. I care about what we do. I care about the people in our industry. I care about the learners, especially those overlooked, undervalued. And I know how much value that we have to offer. And I would end it with, again, these 3 words: learning changes lives. That's what we do. And that's why I do what I do.
Thanks, Keith, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And great questions.
Thank you, Keith.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.